Possession crucial from this. How much longer will the referee allow? Dublin lead by a point, and there's the whistle. It's over. It's over.
We earned it by winning the last 2 matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it. It's over the bar. Oh, holy Moses.
Hello and welcome to the RTÉ GAA Podcast. I'm Mikey Stafford and I am delighted this week to be joined by Colm Keys, the Irish Independent's GAA correspondent, Rory O'Neill, series producer of the Sunday Game, and by Gerry, Killeen, the AXA Research Chair in Applied Pathogen Ecology. You'll note I had to look down at my notes to read Gerry's title. Gerry is definitely the most learned of us. So thank you all for joining us. How are you doing today, lads?
Good, Mikey. Very good.
Thank you.
Good, thanks.
Look, so why we're here is there was a great expectation in large swathes of the society, not excluding the GAA, that Phase 4 would be announced as incoming from next Monday at last Monday's cabinet meeting. That obviously didn't happen, and that's kind of knocked quite a few people for six, not least the GAA, but the government came to a decision off the back of rising new cases of COVID-19 every day, the R number, various signifiers that are worrying NPHET and the government, and they've taken this step, which is obviously not great news for a lot of people. But Gerry, I think you would probably agree that it was a wise move.
Yeah, I think it's we need to do more, but it's a step in the right direction. You know, with the numbers growing so fast, there's no room for further relaxation. So, you know, I think that's a prudent decision.
Okay, it's prudent from a public health perspective, which is obviously all important. But Colm, we've had a couple of GAA administrators coming out this week. You spoke to Westmeath's Billy Foley. We've had Michael Dignan and Peter O'Neill on RTÉ Radio talking about the grave financial repercussions of the crowds of 200 not being increased to 500 at club games, which doesn't sound huge, but there's counties talking about €500,000 deficits for 2020, and Billy Foley told you he could see 15, 20 counties not fielding inter-county teams next year. It's quite a grave situation for the GAA financially.
Yes, Mike, it was a grave situation anyway, but now it's become significantly more perilous for almost every county that relies on internal gate receipts. They really are the lifeblood of so many counties, is how many people they can get inside their gates for these club championship games. These are counties that maybe don't attract the same sponsorship or don't go as far in a championship that there's a financial fundraising model there that they can tap into. These are people putting their hands in their pockets to go into attractive enough club games within their own county. And if they can manage those right and they can be disciplined, they can take quite a bit out of it every year that really supports every other element of their activities. If you take, for example, last year, Galway, all told last year, every county, between the 32 counties, the local gate receipts, notwithstanding provincial and All-Ireland championships that are managed centrally or that are taken in and administered centrally. But if you take the 32 counties, there was almost 10 million in gate receipts, and almost 1 million of that was Galway. Now, Galway are looking at taking in a fraction of that, maybe in the order of 200,000. I would think you may be even stripping that back further with this restriction or this cap of 200 to not going up to 500. And you might, as I said, it may not seem a lot, but there is a critical difference there for a lot of counties, in that if it's €10 in per game, and a lot of these games would be getting close to 500, if you take the difference of 10 by 300, it's 3,000 per game, and multiply that across several games. It's quite a significant difference every weekend. And if you've got hurling and football, let's say Cork and a lot of the big dual counties have games every weekend now over the next 3 weekends, that's a considerable loss. And as we sit here, can we really say that it's going to lift to 500 and that they're going to move on to Phase 4? Or even are they going to, even make an exception for large outdoor events? I would think that's it's far from certain that this is going to lift. So therefore, the cap stays at 200. And to my mind, this makes games, and it's certainly looking forward to inter-county games, because a lot of these gate receipts that counties generate, they would support the preparation of the inter-county team further down. I mean, that is their big revenue raiser in a lot of counties. A lot of them take in excess of 400,000 and 500,000. Galway and Cork obviously go a good bit beyond that. But so it makes it, to my mind, it makes it unsustainable, because there is a lot to staging games, and there is a lot to staging training, and even from from a club point of view, from a local point of view, the opening up of a venue, you're paying ground rent to the club that hosts the game. You're paying for small things like Order of Malta that must be there, obviously, in the case of, and all of these things, small things build up and they eat into whatever you're going to generate from 200 supporters. Not even 200 supporters, obviously, because 90 odd of those are players, referees, media, contractors, we'll say, all of that are in. So you might sell 100 or 110 tickets at €10, and really that's not sustainable for any county. So from that point of view, the running of the games is fantastic, and I would say from the outset that putting clubs first has been a great success, because the numbers and the re-engagement of, and even from a physical well-being, the numbers at the numbers re-engaging with their clubs, even with the public health issues at stake here, have been enormous, and so many have found their ways back to their clubs, and you could say reconnect with their communities too. So from that point of view, in my belief, it has been justified if you are going club first, and that was a discussion earlier in the year. But alone, for the numbers that have reconnected of players and are back playing, from that point alone, that's been a success. But now there's a financial peril here that I think a lot of counties are going to be facing, because there's nothing coming in. Most of the outlay in earlier part of the year has gone towards an inter-county team, and counties depend on gates. They weren't looking for much, and they weren't expecting much, obviously, with the restrictions. But as they project forward now, and the hope is fading that the capacity is going to increase as numbers of COVID-19 increase, it's unlikely that numbers are going to increase to anything that's sustainable. I think the games they're in peril again.
Yeah, Rory, we'll get onto that inter-county scene more so in a second, but just from a club point of view, you're involved with your own club in North County Dublin. The financial impact, is hitting fundraisers at club level. How do you balance that against, say, the social, the public, the social, the physical well-being side of things? And are clubs able to wash their face at the moment? And if they're not, is it worth going into debt, do you think, for the service they provide?
It's never worth going into debt for anything other than, my experience anyway, would be never to go into debt for anything other than a capital investment. Anything other than that, like your day-to-day, which is your running of your teams and the running of the club on a day-to-day, you should never be incurring debt if you're doing your business properly, because that really isn't a financial model that works. I think in terms of how clubs are coping, I think you're falling into two categories. I think there's one category where certain clubs might have had ongoing capital infrastructural developments through which they would be looking to fund via their ongoing regular fundraising mechanisms, like Club Lotto, the jersey sponsorship, draws and fundraising objectives, and then maybe some cash through the turnstiles for their big teams. And one particular team that we saw on the Sunday game recently was Kilcoo, who were in the midst of a major redevelopment up there, fantastic redevelopment, where they're putting a playground onto the grounds of the club to cater for all ages and all children of all sizes. And now their fundraising, the tap has been turned off, but they're still on the hook for this development. Now they'll be okay in the short term to be able to sustain that, because I'm sure, look, they'll get a helping hand from where it's needed, because it's a sort of an unusual circumstance. But for the others, we'll say for the rest of the clubs that are involved, clubs like ourselves, we'll say, you only really have your outgoings, and they're the normal outgoings that you would have, but on a much more reduced scale, like your light heating, bit of maintenance work, significant maintenance work, grass cutting, all that type of stuff. But you're kind of almost in hibernation in a financial sense as things stand. Okay. Now, you won't be able to sustain that in the medium and long term. Not really, given the fact that all our fundraisers have stopped as well. But there's no real danger for us, we'll say, in the short term. And I would say that would be the experience for most clubs of our size. Where you're getting into problems, I would suggest, is when you start looking at the Kilmacud Crokes of this world, the big super clubs, who, you know, like that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Gerry, we're here talking about, you know, the sustainability of the intercounty game, but you and some of your academic peers in epidemiology yesterday sent a letter to the Oireachtas Special Committee advocating a zero COVID island approach. You don't agree that the GAA should be carrying on at the moment in any respect. You really believe that the country needs to take a more serious approach to killing this virus. Is that a fair description of your situation?
Absolutely, and it's you know, it's not the GAA per se. It's not our pubs. It's not our playgrounds. It's not our small businesses. It's the way that all these things add up, and you know, lots of small risks add up to bigger risks. And what we've seen already is that we're in a very different place to where we were at the end of June. And already by allowing that slide back, it would take us a good couple of months to get back to where we were in June. So that's 2 more months of GAA clubs operating at a financially questionable position. I'm sure the same is true of many businesses around the country. And so, you know, it's really about, our problem is we're stuck now in what's called, I guess you could call it a financial limbo, where many businesses and clubs and other aspects of society are operating at a level where we can keep going for a while, but it's not financially sustainable in the long term. It's not a recovery. The only thing that's really recovering is the epidemic. So until we actually go after it, then, you know, there's no way, you can't recover from an epidemic that's not over. And, you know, I'm thrilled with the way the GAA has handled this. I'm thrilled with the way the GAA has maintained an open discourse, and there's been lots of really common sense questions I've been asked by various GAA folks, and it's been an open discussion. I love the emphasis on the community-based approach, the grassroots of the clubs, and I can tell you this much: Ireland is going to need the GAA before this is over. All the big community-based programs I've been involved in Africa were heavily dependent on those grassroots organizations. You know, in this country, it's the GAA. And, you know, our only route out of this is going to rely on, you know, probably the fastest route out of this would be county-based green zoning, where we open up the country 1 county at a time. That requires grassroots at the level of villages and towns and neighborhoods. And it also requires a county system. And, you know, I've been through large-scale public health programs where we were able to demonstrate that public health people who work where they live, and they know everybody, they know their names, they know their families, and those families know where to find them, perform 2 or 3 times better than somebody who might be even better trained, but is not a member of the community. That's your real grassroots solution. So, you know, I think the GAA is sooner or later is going to have a major role to play in our escape from this pandemic.
You mean, Gerry, at the start of the pandemic, you know, there was quite a lot of publicity of GAA clubs and other community organisations delivering groceries to people who were cocooning and things like this. But you mean that you could see before this ends, the GAA actually taking almost an administrative or on the ground, like, active part in eliminating the virus?
Yeah, even if it's just through the social networks and that sense of community, you know, can work both ways. The danger is that the GAA, because each club is a hub for our society, it's also, you know, the danger is there that it becomes an avenue for the virus, and we got to be careful about that one.
Yeah, on that note, Colm, just before we started recording, we have the news came through of a club in Meath, Ballinabrackey. They have reported a positive COVID-19 test of a player who has played a match in recent days. And this is not the first test. We've had probably 20, 30 clubs at this stage who've had some level of a shutdown, but this is going to bring into question the idea of what is a close contact in the GAA. I played a match last night, and we all adhered to the guidelines of traveling on our own, bring our own water bottles, touching elbows, not shaking hands. But then I stood next to the same guy for 30, 40 minutes. But in the eyes of the GAA and the public health advice that they've received, that poor man from Avondale, who had the pleasure of remarking me, he's not a close contact of mine, despite us sweating, breathing, shouting in close proximity to each other for that period of time.
Yeah, I suppose the GAA have left this side of preparation and oversight. Obviously, they've left it to public health officials who involve themselves in contact tracing. And before competitive action resumed, as opposed to challenge matches, the guidance given was that public health would determine it. And so far, and the evidence of the last number of weeks, those on the field, to the best of my knowledge, and I say this could have changed in the last week or so, or in the last 10 days, to the best of my knowledge, they weren't determining opponents and colleagues, any of the action on the pitch, they weren't determining that as close contact. Now, as I said, and I would stress, there's no hard and fast rule about this. That's just the way that that's the way they were going through each of the contacts, whether it be close or casual. That's the determination that I'm led to believe that was being made up to that stage. That may change, and I suppose it's open there. As I said, there's no set rule on that. You would think that someone in close proximity, and as I say, you were standing around for 40 minutes, you should have been moving a lot more in that match. They generally feel that there's so much movement between players, and that, of course, Mikey, that's the modern game, is perpetual motion.
Yeah, it's left me behind, Colm.
Notwithstanding all of that,
except in Junior B hurling
in Wicklow, but notwithstanding all that, that's been the case so far, and there's been about 20 clubs, in the order of 20, maybe just above that now, that have felt the urge and the necessity to shut down activity, whether it be a positive or a negative case, to suspend activity for that period of time, out of concern and out of caution and concern in the community. There is no obligation. There hasn't been an actual obligation to shut down, but I believe in this case the HSE have advised the club in question to suspend activity until they go through the context and assess who's close and who is casual. And it will be interesting to see, is anyone on the opposing team determined as a close contact? And I think that would be important for everybody if that information was made available, if anyone on the opposing team, because that would provide evidence as to the transmission in a sporting sense, in a sporting context, in a GAA context, as to whether an opponent was considered a close contact or was considered to have been transmitted. It'd be interesting just to see and to know at that stage. But so far, this was picked up, I'm led to believe this was picked up in a work setting. There has been nothing picked up in a GAA setting so far. Again, to the best of my knowledge, and I stand to be corrected on that, but there is no evidence to say it has been picked up in a training environment or in a playing environment or any of that. And a lot of precautions are being taken, and they are being largely adhered to, so that the games can continue.
Rory, the prospect, this now from a public health point of view, that the numbers aren't good. You know, Gerry and people who have made this a life's work are saying we need to take this far more seriously than we are. Colm's outlined the financial implications. Is there a case to be made here that the GAA just need to pull up the tent and pull the plug on the 2020 championship, as much for public health reasons as for their own financial well-being?
It's probably too early to make a call like that now, to be fair. Like, the only thing is, I suppose, that the sands are constantly shifting underneath their feet. It's a very, very difficult situation. I wish them the absolute best, because I do not envy the position that they find themselves in, whereby the situation just constantly changes from one week to the next. it's like being blown all over the place and you just don't know which way you're going. It's tough, but it's still a whole tough. I mean, they have the championship itself isn't due to start in earnest until the 24th of October. So they have a bit of time still. I know it's August and we're not that far away. The remaining 2 rounds of the league will be run off quite quickly. And the intercounty training D-Day is September 14th, which is only a little over 5 weeks away when we'll see intercounty teams back training. So they could probably hold tough for another little while and just see and pray, I suppose, that things improve. I think the financial situation is probably the one that would be far more perilous and worrying, as Colm outlined. I mean, I wrote a piece which you published online way back in March when this whole thing began, on the basis that, like, I felt games behind closed doors would be almost going against everything that the GAA stands for. Now, that was on the basis of the more emotional side of things as opposed to the financial. But it's when you actually hear the financial aspects laid out, you realise the difficulties that the organisation is facing. They could probably suck it up for 2020. But like Gerry would probably tell us there, and I'd be interested to hear, there's no guarantees that this situation is going to radically or miraculously change all that much when we hit February, March 2021, when the national leagues are due to resume. So I don't know. I think they probably have to hold tough for another little bit. Look at what happened across the water to a certain extent. I mean, I would be very, very strong on the fact that the government needs to come in here. I think the GAA would be well within their remit to actually seek government subvention and possibly, guidance and compensation, because I think we're now approaching a level, and this is just general discourse I get from speaking to people, that I would have genuine concerns around people's mental health, and I would detect a certain element of depression almost, because, like, as most of the epidemiologists will tell you, this is only the end of the beginning of this. And the stark reality of how far out ahead of us that this whole journey seems to be now is starting to dawn on people, and it's leaving a very undesirable psychological impact. And I think if the GAA can at all be put on, if the GAA Intercounty Championships can at all be salvaged, even via government intervention in some way, shape or form, I think every avenue should be explored to try and achieve that, because I think it would just offer that little bit of a glimpse of hope, or a little bit of light at the end of a very, very dark tunnel.
Okay, so Gerry, you're cast as the harbinger of doom here, even though you are trying to provide the path out of it. But what's with that? The argument that life must go on. I don't want to exist. I want to live. These the restrictions. You take away my GAA, playing at a participatory level or watching at an elite level. Like, what where do we stop? Like, the arguments. This is the counter argument that you hear all the time, that the numbers aren't that high. Except it's not affecting. It's only affecting a certain demographic. It's difficult to get everybody on board to eliminate this, but you have experienced in your own personal life, in Africa, malaria and Ebola outbreaks. I get the impression you don't think as a society we're taking this seriously enough.
Yeah, I agree with the comment about the long dark tunnel. And I don't think I think a lot of people haven't been told clearly just how long and how dark that tunnel is if we choose to live with the virus. So, I can show you half a dozen simulations by people who know what they're doing, really know what they're doing. Some of them are a lot smarter than I am. And those go back as far as March 16th. And what it says is that flattening the curve isn't flat. Epidemics, they don't sit still. You either squeeze them out of existence or they roar back at you. There's no equilibrium point. And so if we get ourselves into this, we're not in an equilibrium situation. We're in a roller coaster of epidemic waves, and then lockdowns, and then relaxation, and then lockdown. So this goes on indefinitely, or for an absolute minimum of 4 years. So they reckon if the United States let its epidemic run at a rate that its ICUs could just about keep up with, you know, and that's not an easy thing to do, then it would take at least 4 years. Now, I think that's a very long tunnel, but in reality, the tunnel is probably longer than that, and there may be no end to it. So, you know, that's not a path to go down. The only exit from this is to go after this virus, to get ourselves back into epidemic contraction again, shrink it down to zero, use that time to work on our ports and our airports and our border crossings and a shared plan with the north of Ireland, a lot of which could actually centre around the county-based system. You know, we all survived phase 2 with county plus a few kilometres that allowed us to stay in touch with our relatives, our friends, our communities, our businesses. You know, that can operate both sides of the border. It allows us to reopen the country a county at a time through a green zone system. It takes care of the border without actually turning it into a political issue, you know. A highly infectious hen night flying into Belfast wouldn't get anywhere near the border or Dublin. A plane load of Texans who wanted to see the Giants Causeway would never get out of Dublin County. And so, you know, we could be out of this well before Christmas. In fact, we could have been out of this or very close to it already. You know, we could have been on zero count and be looking at the calendar, figuring out when is our 28 days over. You know, go through the same protocols that people go through in Ebola outbreaks, that New Zealand went through, that the Chinese are going through province by province. And we can have our football matches back, our hurling matches back. We can have full stands. We can get excited about it. We can shout our lungs out without a mask on. We can even reopen the bar, but that won't come easy. And it's a tunnel, but it's a much, much shorter one. It's a bit of a tough gig, but we've been through it before. And it's going to be community-based organizations like the GAA. And the GAA, first and foremost, that will be absolutely central to that ambitious strategy.
And Gerry, I know we're veering off GA a little bit, but I think it's important to ask, what has been the reaction to the letter you sent yesterday, and what do you think are the chances of this approach being adopted by the government?
The new minister and the new Taoiseach are using much more measured, technically informed language, which I find reassuring. There is some phraseology in there that says there's an open discussion. You know, myself and my colleagues, we've all been offering to testify to the Oireachtas committee for months. I actually thought that my expertise would not be required for this pandemic because technically it's fairly straightforward. The problem with COVID is it's politically difficult because risk is not evenly distributed, so it splits society. And that's the real sting in the tail with this particular virus. So, you know, I initially, when I did my first, really sat down with the evidence coming out of China and I read it, I knew we were in a global pandemic, but I thought that I would be redundant because the decisions that need to be made are very, very clear. However, when I started to read some of the things being said by our political leadership at that time, I started writing to well-placed colleagues in Ireland to get some very clear views to the top of the HSE and to our Taoiseach. And so I started trying to get through on March 11th. To this day, I've never had anything other than an acknowledgement of receipt from an administrative officer at the Oireachtas committee.
Okay.
So I'm really hoping that whole thing changes and we start having a discussion, balanced discussion. Like, I've been thrilled with the kind of articles I've been seeing from GAA commentators. You know, some people saying we've got to push ahead with this, but carefully. Others saying, well, listen, you know, are we sure it's worth this? And it's been a healthy discussion. And a lot of the phone calls I've had from GAA commentators have been full of common sense, but it differs from the government line. And basically all they need from me is to say, you're absolutely dead right.
Yeah.
And, you know, any of us who played competitive sports, how do you mark somebody without being a close contact? You know, how do you have more close contact than that without a romantic involvement? I don't see it. So,
yeah.
you know, there's tons of people around this country with lots of common sense and straightforward intuition. So I would just encourage people to apply that.
Yeah, it's grim enough. And Colm, I know you've painted your own kind of picture, that prophecy, that it's not looking great from a financial point of view, and we have to look beyond it. Unless Gerry and his colleagues' zero COVID island approach is adopted, it's likely that we are going to live with this for a year or more. So it's not like magically the calendar is going to change in January and the GAA are looking at 100% capacity at their grounds for club or inter-county matches. We're looking at compulsory face masks, no pub, no bars, and no cafes and restaurants open in Croke Park or Parky Queeve or anywhere else, and potentially 7,000 people in Croke Park for social distancing of 2 meters, or maybe Peter McKenna said maybe 20,000 if it's 1 meter, but that's what they have mapped out. But as Rory says, they're shifting sands here. So the GAA's financial outlook, it's not great for not just this year, but next year isn't actually going to rectify everything, is it?
No, it's in real trouble. There's no doubt about that. Wishful thinking, I think, at this stage now. I think that it'd be 30,000 at an All Ireland final on December the 19th later this year, an All Ireland football final, or even there was a figure at 22, but I think it was around 30,000. They thought with a 1 meter social distancing, with 2 meters it was 7,000. But that's not even what concerns public health. If you take the news earlier this week, it's the congregation, it's the build-up, it's all of that traveling together, and all of that they're trying to negate in some way by keeping the level of the capacity of supporters at such a low level. So I think I don't see it lifting in the short term. If it goes up to 500, that's about it in the short term, and that will take us into October when inter-county games start. So you may only have possibly, and again, this is just surmising, you may only have 500 at those games. I don't see it going too much further because there's a cautionary approach here. So at 500 people going into championship games, if you take it that last year's gate receipts, and obviously it includes an All-Ireland final replay, it was 36 million. Even allowing for a fraction of that, I'd say perhaps a fraction of that was being budgeted for, and now you can take a fraction of that again because of the cap on restrictions. Meanwhile, the inter-county season, as Rory said, is cranking back up from September the 14th. It costs a lot of money. Even though it's an amateur game, it costs a lot of money to run a training session. When you consider the catering, post-match catering, which is of good quality now, and there's a nutritional value involved in that. The services from physios, video analysis, masseurs, all of that, the medical backup, injuries have to be treated at a very high level when they occur. And then, of course, there is there's obviously money goes to coaches. We know that. Okay, it's prohibited by rule, but it happens. There are strength and conditioning coaches who have contracts, and once training restarts, they have to get something out of that.
Equipment, gear.
Equipment has to be bought, obviously precautions. And then there's the mileage, 65 cent a mile for players going to training, and there's a nutrition allowance, and there's all of those things. So the cost of a training session, hosting one training session, if you're down the country and your players are required to travel, say from Dublin, if they are based in Dublin, all of these things, it could cost 7,000 or 8,000, maybe more, to run a training session, something around that. So if you want to run 3 in the week, you're up to 25,000. If you want to travel to a game then and overnight, how many buses do you need to go to that game to socially distance properly and to have those safeguards? If you want to stay overnight instead of 2 to a room, you're probably down to 1 per room. And that's the bills rising all the time just to get the games back underway. And while there's a huge social value, as we said earlier, of people being able to sit down and watch these games from the comfort of their own home and be able to see them, even if they're in front of empty terraces, the cost of actually getting to that stage, if players and management are to prepare to the same levels that they used to, now maybe they'd say, look, we can cut certain things out. But some counties will be able to do that, but some counties will be satisfied with just going along with the bare minimum, but others would have different revenue streams and we know that some of the better counties are much better resourced financially. They'll be able to continue on. So it's never a level playing field because of population. It's never a level playing field because of finance, but it'll be a much less level playing field because of this, because so many counties rely on club gate receipts to support their inter-county preparations. That's not happening, and the GAA cannot shore this up. So if you look at last year's broadcasting revenue, 14 million, how much of that are the GAA going to get out of 2020? I'd suggest, I couldn't even put a figure on it, but there's less games. So that means that there has to be less in it for broadcasters to pay for. So that's another issue for the GAA at central level. And that means they cannot distribute anywhere near the money down to support inter-county preparation. So it's really a decision for teams and players and county boards to say, we can only give you so much. Are you happy with that? Some will be, some won't be. So it's very fractured, and it's not going to be very well financially supported.
We'll finish up now in a second. Colm's given us a grim financial point of view. Gerry, I might go to you just to finish then on. I wouldn't ask as an academic, a scientist, to make a prediction per se, but looking at your models, looking at what you know about this epidemic, about previous epidemics, what do you think are on our current track? What are the chances of the inter-county season being completed with crowds or without?
Safely, I would say 0. I think if we were to get into the Cheltenham sort of fiasco, I think, I think that would be sad. I think, but it's not just, it's not football, it's not hurling, it's not camogie, it's all the things that we want to reopen, and there's the tender trap. And the dangerous thing that, the bait that we've taken on this is that our authorities have all given us a little piece of the jigsaw puzzle to work on, right? So we've all been given some little Rubik's Cube, and for the GAA, it is, it's an insoluble puzzle. How do you play a game of hurling socially distanced? Strict. I mean, it's not possible, right? How do you run a financially sustainable pub with a handful of customers every day, and you've got to run it at the level of a BSL-3 laboratory? How do you do that? How do you reopen a school without creating, really looking for trouble? And so these plans, they just don't add up. They've been offloaded onto different sectors of society, and it's time for us all to just put down the Rubik's Cube and say, this doesn't add up. What's our strategy? And if you're telling us to live with the virus, how long are you asking us to do that for? And what does that look like? Every simulation that I look at looks really, really grim. Now, I've tweeted those out. I just took a selection of 4 graphs from 4 sets of people who really know their business, including one group from UCC who kind of put numbers on it that really match my best guesses. What they said is we'll swing back into epidemic growth at the transition between our old phase 3 and phase 4. Then we concertinaed into 4 phases, and we're in phase 3 plus now, and our epidemic is growing. So all those predictive numbers, they all add up. They all go back as far as March 16th. It's time to start taking these things seriously, and it's time to stop digging ourselves into a bigger hole. Because even to get back to where we were in late June, that's going to take us a couple of months at a minimum. And, let's stop that now and really talk about how we all work together on getting to that exit point, and have something in common with New Zealand, who've all been back to fully competitive sports and full stadiums, I think, for 2 or 3 months now.
Yeah, well, we hope we get there, but it's a grim picture that we're painting here from a public health and from a financial point of view. So I'd say enjoy the matches while we can, and let's hope that something changes, or let's hope that those models are wrong, but that's not the nature of models.
Just on that though, Mikey, just one point we should make though. The GAA will survive this. What shape it's in when we come out the other side is absolutely another question and something to debate on another day. And the philosophies and policies that would have guided the association for the last 125 years, maybe all of those things need to be discussed and raked over to look at where we go when we do come out of it. But it will survive. Mm-hmm. It's just how it's going to look when we get out the other side.
A note of hope. Thank you, Rory. And thank you to Colm, and thank you to Gerry. Really enjoyed that conversation, even though it was as grim as hell. I would say enjoy the games while you can. You can follow updates on Saturday and Sunday Sport on Radio 1 this weekend, and there's a couple of live Limerick hurling matches on RTÉ too. So watch them and enjoy them, and we'll have some reports and reaction and some more GA features on the RTÉ website and the News Now app over the weekend. So once again, thank you to the lads for joining in, and please do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already, and we'll catch you again next week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thanks, lads. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks,
Take care, Dad.
Possession crucial from this. How much longer will the referee allow? Dublin lead by a point, and there's the whistle. It's over. It's over.
We earned it by winning the last 2 matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it. He hits it. It's